In all of Canada's history until 2020, only 4 TV dramas made by and about Black Canadians had made it to air on a major broadcaster. Canada's screen output has been predominantly white, male, and heterosexual, even though Black people have been part of Canada's population since before Confederation. The system is broken, or more accurately, it was designed to exclude Black creators and Black-focused content from the Canadian screen canon. So in 2021, the Black Screen Office set out to identify the central issues that create barriers for Black screen industry workers and Black audiences. While Black people are uniquely marginalized by Canada's screen industry, the BSO recognized that there are common experiences across all underrepresented groups. Examining and addressing inclusion and authentic representation holistically would be critical for the industry to become truly equitable. The BSO launched 3 research projects: Being Counted, Being Heard, and Being Seen. With the knowledge gained from this research, BSO can work with decision makers on tools and strategies to dismantle the industry's anti-Black practices and improve authentic representation overall. The 3 research projects look at the issues from different angles. Being Counted looks at audiences, specifically Black, Indigenous, and people of color audiences, whose preferences are usually hidden within general population data in traditional audience surveys. This basically makes them invisible to screen content decision makers. Through Being Counted, these decision makers gain insight into who they are missing, as well as these viewers' habits and preferences. Being Heard looks inward at the Canadian screen industry. It offers data on the prevalence of Black workers and their experiences. Black industry workers have not been examined in any meaningful way until now, and Being Heard will help identify ways to support their success. Being Seen looks at Canada's screen industry content. Inspired by Imaginative's protocols and pathways, Being Seen explores the perspectives of screen industry professionals and members of the viewing public who are Black, people of color, 2S LGBTQIA+, and people with disabilities. From across the country, more than 400 individuals from these communities participated in Being Seen focus groups and interviews in both English and French. Participants included members of the screen industries as well as the general public. For the Children's Media Report, we talked to children's media creators from the 4 communities, and also parents and children and youth ranging in age from 6 to 17. Knowing that individuals have multiple dimensions, BSO took an intersectional approach to this research, which allowed participants to talk about any aspects of their identity. Letting participants choose allowed them to bring their full selves to these discussions. BSO also divided communities into subcategories whenever possible, such as a blind or deaf focus group within the people with disabilities category. This allowed for deeper exploration of specific communities. Within these Being Seen safe spaces, participants spoke with passion, strength, vulnerability, and at times, tears. They provided valuable insights into how Canada's screen industries can and must change to better reflect them and their needs. Many common themes emerged across the communities, as well as challenges unique to each community group. The result of this research is the Being Seen Core Report, which captures the universal themes shared across all 4 communities. There are also 5 companion reports, 1 in each community, and a Children's Media Report. Each report offers anecdotal insights on representation, as well as clear directives for industry leaders on how to create and commission more authentic and inclusive content. The data and perspectives that Being Counted, Being Heard, and Being Seen reveal establish an evidence-based foundation for change. This BSO research can and should support industry leaders to create and approve content that authentically represents the full diversity of Canada's communities. We also expect them to prompt more discussion and action on the structural changes that are needed to increase representation on set, on screen, and in industry boardrooms.
Welcome everybody to the 4th Children's Media Workshop Being Seen, sponsored by the Shaw Rocket Fund and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation and Black Screen Office. We may have a few more people joining us, trickling in, but we want to respect your time, so we're going to get started. So just want to start with a land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by honoring the land that we are on, which has been the site of human activity since time immemorial. The Black Screen Office is located on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation. However, as a virtual meeting, we want to also acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations who call this land home and host us today and every day. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation or generations past. We would also like to acknowledge those of us who came here forcibly, particularly as the result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. Now, I am Kelly Lynn Ashton, the lead researcher for the Being Seen project. And as a visual description, I have tan skin, red glasses, short gray hair, a flowered red t-shirt, blue walls in the background with stairs, and occasionally you see my cat going up and down the stairs. We also have as a facilitator who's helping me with this, Caitlin. Oh, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name.
It's okay. There's much debate over it, but I can take
I will throw to you, and then you can tell us how to pronounce it.
Yeah, you can take it from here. I can take it. My name is Caitlin Langelier, if you're Quebecer. My pronouns are she and her. I have white skin, shoulder length brown hair, and a black t-shirt on. I'm in a blue room, my childhood bedroom, and you may see my toy poodle pop up in the background from time to time.
Thank you. So if you've participated in our other workshops here, you know the format. We talk a bit about the directives, give some statistical perspective, and then Caitlin leads us in a conversation about how to implement the directives. And for this workshop, we're specifically looking at the 2S LGBTQIA+ communities. We can go to a slide on the stats. I like to start off with stats about the community, and that is particularly challenging with 2S LGBTQIA+, because StatsCan only started tracking lesbian, gay, and bisexuals in 2003, and then expanded it to gender identity and what they called sexual minorities in 2018. But that wasn't in the general census. That was in a specific survey on gender-based violence. And in this most recent census, expanded to questions about gender and sex at birth for the first time. So there are gaps in our knowledge. From the 2016 survey, StatsCan estimated that 4% of the population over 15 are LGBTQ2+, which is the term that the government used. And from the most recent survey, 0.33% of the population are transgender or non-binary. That may be underreporting. People are not completely comfortable with identifying, particularly to government. So I think we're only going to see that that could grow over time. Well, 30% of the LGBTQ2+ population are 15 to 24. compared to 14% of the non-LGBTQ population. So it's a very young demographic. And 12% of same-sex couples have children living with them. So the dynamic of a same-sex family or with same-sex parents with kids, that there's a sizable population of that family dynamic. So the other thing is that when same-sex marriage was legalized in Canada in 2005, and between 2006 and 2016, the number of same-sex couples increased 60% compared to 9.6% for the opposite sex couples. So that's a whole growth in the demographic. Now, most or half of all same-sex couples live in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Ottawa, Gatineau. So it's still a pretty urban population. But one of the failings in the stats is that there is no ethnocultural data of the 2S LGBTQIA plus communities. So I can't tell you how many South Asian gay men there are, or how many Black trans women, or people with disabilities who are 2S LGBTQIA plus. And that seems to me to be, as a researcher, a very significant gap. So all we can do is talk anecdotally, and from the response that we've had in our research, we know that the 2S LGBTQIA plus communities are very diverse, both ethnoculturally and in terms of other intersectionality and identities. And so to you, Caitlin.
Wonderful. Talking about gaps in our data and knowledge, I would just like to acknowledge that as a facilitator, my perspective is also limited. I'm a white cisgender woman from a middle-class background, and the LGBT community is one of the most diverse communities that exists based on some of the data from the United States. So just a note that intersectionality is a key part of everything that we do and should be taken into account. I'd also like to speak briefly on vocabulary. Now, being seen refers to the 2SL LGBTQIA plus community because that is the terminology that the government prefers, but that is an evolving term. Not everyone in the community agrees, so sometimes you'll see LGBTQ, LGBT plus, LGBTQIIAS plus, or queer, and among other terms. And the most important thing to remember about these terms is that if you are ever told that you are using the wrong term by someone who personally identifies with a certain term, to not get defensive about it and to accept what that person says, because there is no authority in the LGBT community on what the proper terminology is. I personally can identify as queer. I identify as lesbian or queer or gay. Someone else might think any of those terms doesn't suit them or is even offensive. So please, if you ever misspeak, don't take that personally, because accepting criticisms from people in a community that you're trying to support is a key part of our allyship. Now, for this workshop, we're going to be looking at queer representation in kids media. I am going to be using the term queer, just to get that ahead. So we're looking at characters who are children and characters who are adults, because as we all know, sexuality and gender are inherent parts of life from the time that we're born. And they're as relevant to children's media as any other subject is. So both from the perspective of kids who are queer themselves and deserve to feel included, kids who know and love queer people and their family and friends and may have questions about queerness, or kids who may be exposed to queer folks for the very first time through the media that we create and can form assumptions or questions based on what we put out into the world. So, speaking of what we put out into the world, I would love to get our conversation going. We want this to be interactive. Everyone, you can put your microphones on, put your cameras on if you feel comfortable. What I would love to start talking about is a celebration of the work that we've done so far. And I would love to just throw out some shows that we know in the kids space that have LGBT representation in them. So I'm just going to open up a Google Doc right now so that we can all see, and we're going to share this document after we're done so that we can all go home and we can all watch these shows. So if anyone can just throw out some, I've got the categories for preschool, school age, tween, and teen. So does anyone know any queer shows? Come on, come on. Don't be shy. Come on.
Well, Kai wrote in the chat, Dead End.
Dead End. That's a good one. That's in teen. Or no, that's the new, the fair one, right? Yes, on a camping trip, right? That one's good. She-Ra, of course. She-Ra is amazing. She-Ra's, I'd say that it's a little more like school age, tween, huh? That's what you get for writing and speaking at the same time. Arthur, yes. Steven Universe, you can't have a conversation about queerness in kids media without Steven Universe. Owl House, of course that doesn't have a question mark on it. Owl House is absolutely queer. Sesame Street, yeah, let's throw Sesame Street in there. Dino Ranch, yes, Dino Ranch is the show that I write for, and it does have an episode with gay dinosaurs. Craig of the Creek, excellent show. Okay. Do we have any more in, oh, Victor, yeah, love Victor. If you have queer movies as well, I'm focusing on TV shows, but any queer movies as well, it absolutely works. I'm going to flex on y'all because I'm going to add a bunch of ones to this list. So you're going to be real embarrassed if you don't contribute anything. I'm going to add some up here. I'm going to put some more in preschool. How about Bubble Guppies and Doc McStuffins? Muppet Babies, good one. Muppet Babies. How about these ones you might have heard of? Baby Shark's Big Show, and the new series of Clifford the Big Red Dog. I'm going to go down to school age. How about one of my favorites, Legend of Korra, Adventure Time, the Owl House. Oh, we got Owl House. No, someone the Loud House. 16 Hudson, yes, I was waiting for someone. Yes, SpongeBob. Asexual Icon. Faye and Fluffy, we've got that one. Got Star versus the Forces of Evil. How about this one? These are some for my co-elder millennials. Gargoyles. My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Got Mysticons in there. Middle School Moguls, Danger and Eggs. Oh, and I'm just going to add a bunch to the tween category. Glee, yes. Miss Persona, yes. Miss Persona. Teen and Young Adult, yeah, Glee. Got that right in there. And add some more teen shows. I could add a million teen shows, but I'm just gonna add some of my favorites. Not going to go through all these one at a time because this will be shared with you after. So I just wanted to point out how many shows we were able to put on this list. I want you to see from these examples, there is actually, and proportionately compared to the rest of the show, maybe not as much as we would want, but there's absolutely, yes, Sabrina. There is actually a lot out there that has been done, a lot of road that has been paved for us. And these are successful shows that didn't cause the show to be canceled. The network didn't lose its funding. The toys still sell. So I hope that this list empowers you to know that the work that you want to do is out there being supported, and anyone who tells you that it can't be done in the kids space is wrong. And yes, absolutely, some of the shows have more meaningful representation than others, and we will be getting into how to create more quality representation as well. But thank you. I'll throw it back to Kelly now.
Okay, if we can go to the slide with the quotes. These quotes come from the research, and it's just ways of illustrating why it is so important and why we need to keep working on it. So first one, there's a 7-year-old saying that they haven't seen anyone who's identified as gender fluid. And there is a tendency, particularly with those who are not part of the community, to think that kids at that age haven't figured out that they might be gender fluid or haven't started exploring their identity. But here's the 7-year-old saying, no, I am exploring it. I do feel gender fluid, and I'm not seeing that. Then there's in the next quote, parent who is a solo gender parent, and from her perspective, it's about creating content within the mainstream kid content that her son can identify with, because he's not going to look at specifically labeled queer content. He wants to fit in with everybody else. So as she put it, it's got to be included in Paw Patrol. And then the third one was about how you represent, and the perspective of this kid is gender non-conforming characters. They're out there, but they're always stereotyped as neither masculine or feminine. And again, it's about that fluidity, particularly as a teen when you're still trying to figure out your identity. And it's not about the clothes. And sometimes they might feel like they want to be masculine. Sometimes they might want to feel like feminine in the way that they dress. But clothing shouldn't have a gender assigned to it. Just some things to think about coming from the parents and the kids in the community. And I think we go on next to back to no, specifically now going into stereotypes, how to avoid them, how to create characters that either avoid the stereotypes or subvert them. And as I mentioned, there isn't data that can substantiate how many people are within both LGBTQ and different ethnocultural communities, but they're out there. And as Caitlin referred to, there are studies in the States that demonstrate that they're out there. What we keep hearing is a frustration that when there are LGBTQ characters, they are predominantly white male. People want to see the full diversity of the communities. The other frustration is a perception that the LGBTQ people are portrayed from a heteronormative gaze. And by that, I mean, from a straight perspective of what straight people think queer people are, how they should be portrayed, or what they think is attractive. So that's when you get all the really buff young men, and if you spend time with gay men, you see that there's a whole range of body shapes, because everybody is part of that community. It's not just a particular body shape, whether you're talking about men, women, gender fluid. There are many different types as there are people. And so I think now I'll just ask Caitlin to do a little more conversation about characters.
Yeah, I would love to. So I want to, again, have an interactive exercise where we flex some of our critical thinking skills. So we're going to create some queer characters together. Now, I have prepped some examples for us to look at. And we are going to look at these characters and we are going to identify things that we think are strong and things that need to be improved. So these are all just hypothetical characters. Don't worry about offending anyone. They're all just things I made up. So before we go into it, I just want everyone here to consider the question: are queer people just like anyone else? This comes up a lot. So here's my first example. Example 1. You're working on a preschool CG science and nature show. One episode is planned to be about cuttlefish, drawing a parallel between them and trans and non-binary folks. The main cast finds a male cuttlefish in the wild and discovers he can change his shape and color to mimic a female cuttlefish. They learn cuttlefish do this in order to sneak past other males and gain access to females. The takeaway of the episode is that transgenderism is found in nature and is nothing new. Do you see any problems with this story and character? How would you improve it? Henry, what do you got for us?
Yes, almost immediately I saw problems with it. One of the main things is that it describes the cuttlefish as being some sort of sneaky character that uses its ability to change shape and color to sort of mimic a female cuttlefish. So it's not really representing the reality of trans and non-binary people. And of course, I can't speak to that as I'm not a part of that community, but just the language that's used in this paragraph could perhaps be a negative perception, sort of giving off the image or the idea that people in the trans non-binary community are trying to deceive people, which is of course not true. So definitely, there's a lot that could be improved here, but it is sort of an interesting idea using an animal or a part of nature to explore these themes.
Great. All great points. I totally agree with. Does anyone else have anything to add? You can raise your hand or you can just talk. I'd like to specifically ask if there's something in this that you think is salvageable. Is there something in this that you think can be turned into an interesting story? Henry, go for it.
Well, I think definitely the idea about an animal or a non-human entity identifying with the LGBTQ community, because I can't necessarily draw specifics, but I have read articles or information about animals that sort of their adaptive behaviors and evolutionary behaviors do sort of align with the LGBT community. So it is a part of science and nature, and I do think that aspect of this character could be something salvageable if it's reworked and how it's presented.
Excellent, thank you. And yes, that is all true. There are two main takeaways that I'd like you to think of from this example. First of all, as Henry pointed out, the perception of trans identities as sneaky or deceptive is one of the major threats to the trans community at this time. And if we are all informed about the controversies happening, especially in the southern United States at this point in time, talking about removing trans content from schools, children's books, not allowing children around drag brunches, etc. Being informed on trans issues and how they can be perceived through these episodes as harmful stereotypes is very, very important. So everyone should make sure to be informed on the current events of LGBT issues. Also, as Henrietta was saying, we can still not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is something interesting in the fact that LGBT people, if you want to refer to them as people from the animal kingdom, it is present in nature. So there is a way to do this, but not focus on the mimicking and sneaking to gain access to female spaces. So, Great Birth, thank you for your help. I'd like to move on to the next example. You're working on a tween live action dramedy series where the main character is a 16-year-old bisexual girl. Throughout the series, her main love interest is a boy, and it's never explicitly stated that she is queer, but it's heavily hinted in the subtext until the series finale, when she and her best female friend hold hands and share meaningful eye contact while romantic music plays. This is where the episode and the series ends. Do you see any problems with this story and character? How would you improve it? Henry, what do you got?
Yes, and sorry to be the only one answering, so if anybody else wants to participate.
Come on,
but
don't let me
anyways,
do all the work for you.
okay, well, anyways, that anecdote, I think, is probably a more positive description of the character. I think the fact that they sort of show her love interest being a boy, and then it's indicated that it could be a girl later on in the series, I think is good in the sense that it doesn't necessarily make it a huge deal that she's attracted to more than one gender. So I think the subtlety of that is nice, that it could just be she's moved on from the boy to the girl, and that's just the way it is. Perhaps if the representation was to be a bit more meaningful, it could have been a story that's explored in earlier episodes or earlier seasons of the show. However, that would ultimately depend on what the story arc is. So I don't think it's terrible, but of course it could be enriched a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Could the people who are in chat voice their chats as well, if they feel comfortable?
Hi, my name's Leslie. I wrote the one saying about more explicit language about her bisexuality throughout the series, as it seems a bit too ambiguous. I was writing again. I'm just not feeling well, so my throat's a little groggy.
Oh, I appreciate the effort.
But I can speak. I think that it being used as like a shock at the end of this season is like, maybe that's not the intention, but I feel almost triggered by that. Like, I feel like I've seen this on TV before. It's like, oh, I think, was it in maybe Buffy? We're like, oh yeah, now she's gay. And it's like, I just think making it like, I guess it's because it feels like it's a shock to a heteronormative audience. Like, oh, oops. And it's like, well, this isn't a big deal, but they're using it that way, maybe. That's how I feel.
Yeah, if I can add, oh, sorry.
Please, Kelly Lynn, yes.
I just wanted to say, this is a recurring theme that came up in our consultations where people were saying that they're always having to decipher and figure out who might be bisexual based on, how something is coded. And they'd really like it actually explicitly stated. Like, it doesn't have to be sort of in your face, just the fact that they are. the character in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, where they stated that she was bisexual. It's again about making people feel included, so they don't actually have to do the work to figure out that they're included.
That's a great point. And this is going to be one of the most prevalent back and forths that we as queer kids content creators will need to deal with. Because I would like to not to call anyone out, just to say that this is a recurring theme, that the idea of saying it out loud is making too big of a deal out of a character's sexuality. Because as Leslie pointed out, when you're centering a heteronormative point of view, it does seem like, why are you going out of your way to talk about your sexuality when that's not really relevant to who you are? However, as I think queer people would tell you, their queerness is an important part of who they are and how they see the world. And the idea that to state their sexuality and their intentions out loud is creating too big of a deal, or perhaps alienating a heterosexual audience, is something that we as creators are going to have to come up against a lot. But the main takeaway that I would like you to take from this example is to say gay. Be explicit, be clear. Gay is not a bad word, and you don't reduce a character's humanity by talking about their queerness, even if their queerness isn't the center of what the story is. Kai made a great point pointing out, if her POV is all about discovering this about herself, well, maybe that's a little more understandable. Something else I'd like to point out in this example is possible bisexual erasure, which is where if she has been focused on this male love interest for the entirety of her story, does that in any way undermine her bisexuality? However, the other thought could be that you're no less bisexual if you're in a perceptively heterosexual romance. So these are all questions that I would like everyone to consider. There's no easy answers, which is why we all just need to get very good at having difficult conversations and not being shy about it. Yes. Being queer and saying I'm queer is a part of my culture, and I like to bring it up to my friends and in producers' meetings. Yes, absolutely, Leslie. I always like to say I got my first job for being queer. I talked about what I liked to do in kids media and queerness, and ended up working with someone who had a similar point of view from mine, which was a big surprise to my mom, who thought I shouldn't tell anyone that I was queer, or it might affect my job opportunities. All right. So what I'd like to just skip on for the third example, actually, and go into more general discussion. I want to know, what traits do we as a group associate with queerness? Personality traits or physical characteristics? What do we think? What does queerness look like? Depends on the label, absolutely. And we can also talk about stereotypes here. What are the queer stereotypes? Yes, exactly. Hard to answer. The community is inherently diverse. Absolutely. So I'd like to consider, what if you were working on a show and someone came up with a character who was a lesbian, who was, so let's say lesbian character, And this person is fat with short hair, butch clothing style. What do you think of this description? Or if it was, yes, as you point out, gay male character, flamboyant, demonstrative, effeminate. What do we think of these very gender binary descriptions of gay people? Do you think that these characters have a place in children's media? Kai, you nailed it. What about everyone else? Not if that's all we see. Christine, excellent point. Yes, yes, that is exactly what I was hoping. As long as there are others. Yes, yes. So here's another thing that is going to come up over and over. You get one gay character in your show and everyone pores over every detail because they don't want to fall into stereotypes. So no, we can't have our gay male character be effeminate. No, we can't have our gay female character to be butch. But what they don't even consider, why not have two gay characters? And then you don't need to have one gay character stand for all of the queer community, where you end up with someone who can sometimes be too perfect, too far to the other side, where they don't feel like a real person. Because I think for anyone who's in the community, you know, there are a lot of lesbians who are butch lesbians, and there are a lot of gay men who are effeminate men, and that's okay, right? Yes, not just 2 or 4 or 5, all in the season. Really, if we look at where the trends for our children are going, there was even a study that came out a few years ago saying that for teenagers, that 50% of them didn't identify as straight. And if we think about it from that perspective, having only one gay male character, having only one gay female character, that just doesn't cut it anymore. That is not adequate representation. Anything less than 10 to 50% of your characters being queer is insufficient from my perspective. So thank you very much for getting us there very quickly. So I'm going to pass back to Kelly now. Kellyanne, sorry. Kelly Lynn.
Okay, so what we're now talking about is, okay, sorry, I got so engaged with the conversation, lost track. So we're talking about queer stories now. We've talked about characters, now it's about stories, because the current trends are a little too much about focusing on trauma. So it's the coming out stories, it's the parental rejection stories, the transitioning stories. And what the communities are telling us is that there's so much more to who they are than just the trauma-based stories. So we want to, and there's a big demand for well-adjusted gay parents so that their kids can see that their family dynamic of happy, well-adjusted gay parents is normal, is part of the everyday dynamic. So we're looking at creating a wider range of stories, a wider range of worlds that are created, and not just limiting. So with the list of stories that Caitlin went through, a number of them, the queer characters were not the central characters. They were the best friends, sometimes the villains. And that's the other thing that people are asking for. Let's center the stories on the gay characters so that they're not just, there's an episode with a focus, or it's the gay best friend who's the butt of the jokes, or the one giving fashion advice. It's what's the hero's journey of the gay character? So now, Caitlin, you can explore that a little bit more.
Yes, let's explore together. So I have a couple more examples here, and some of the ones that Kelly Lynn just said, talking about different queer stories or stories with queer characters in them, because there is a difference between those two things. So I would like to talk about some possible examples of both of those categories and how we can do that representation properly, because just as we were pointing out in our previous example, there may still be room for these sorts of stories where there is a queer best friend or queer villain or coming out or transitioning, but how can we do this in a way that is affirming rather than stereotypical and harmful? So I put some of the examples Kelly had over there. Please throw out any examples that you have, whether they're affirming or not affirming. You can throw out some bad examples and we can talk about why they're bad and how we can make them better, or throw them out entirely if that's the way to do it. Coming out, parent rejection, being alienated from the family, yes. Becoming alienated from your parents, coming out. Schitt's Creek is a very nice example. Parental affirmation, parent, family, becoming advocates. There has to be ways to tell that story in a kid's context. That is a very interesting thought. I would love for you to put more more words to that if you'd like.
Hi.
Yes.
Like David spoke of wine, his taste in wine, like maybe on a kids show it could be someone's taste in toys,
Yeah.
or someone's taste in video games, or something, to that effect. I found that to make it palatable to the public at large, to use something that's so common, still does not address it directly, but it's very clear this is what it's about. But something similar, in a toys context, or, what you find in a classroom, something like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, what would you all say that the difference between a queer story and a story with a queer person in it is, and is one more valuable than another? Depends on the audience. Let's stay focused on kids media. So let's say school age. In school age, what is a queer story and what is a story with queer characters in it?
The queer story would sort of center the character, whereas the one with them in it would have them being in a more supporting role or a more superficial role, the background character, best friend, something like that doesn't really dive deep into their story and their experience and who they are. So more superficial, I think.
I would argue that the perception that getting into the queer character's story automatically makes it a queer story might not be true. If you can have a story with a queer character, you can still have a queer character at the center, but it will be a story that doesn't pivot around queerness. So in the examples that Kelly Lynn gave, where we're talking about coming out, transitioning, being rejected from your family for queerness, being outed, or a queer romance, those are stories that I would personally say are queer stories centering around queerness. The queerness, not the person. A queer person can still be part of a non-queer story. Obviously, they are still queer, and it is still queer representation, and it is still valuable. However, you can have a story where the character's sexuality isn't a key defining point of the story. Stories with a queer character may introduce the concept of it, yes, in the kids space.
Can I just ask, Caitlin, using an example from your own background, would you say then, or your own career, that a story about two gay dinosaurs adopting, is that a queer story or a story with queer characters?
That one I think is debatable, because
I asked it.
yeah, absolutely. So you can have the story that I wrote for Dino Ranch is about two gay male dinosaurs who want to have a baby of their own, and all they have now is a nest full of rocks. So if I were to make that story more of a queer story from the traditional perspective, what the kids' reaction to that would be in the show might be questioning whether these two men can look after a baby and then discovering that they can. Or it would be thinking that there's something wrong with them and then discovering, oh no, this is actually just another way to be. However, the way we approached that episode was for the kids to immediately accept that these are two loving parents who deserve to have a child. And the dramatic hinge point of the episode is just, how do we get them this egg? So I would say that even though we are introducing to a presumed audience that may not know what a gay relationship is, we made a point of saying that they were both men, of that they're both dads, that they're going to raise it together, so that it's very clear. But that's not what the story is about. So that's how I would describe it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to that question of, are queer people like everyone else? Does anyone want to hazard a guess at that? I know that that's a bit of a loaded question, but does anyone want to hazard a guess? Are queer people just like everyone else? I won't put you on the spot. I'll go out on a limb, and I would say that from my perspective, the answer to this question is yes and no. Queer people can be just like anyone else when you're talking about the broad landscape of what stories we can tell for kids. But there are things that are special about being queer and a history that comes with those identities. Making an authentic gay character is not always just as simple as saying that they're gay and otherwise there's nothing different about them from everyone else. And sometimes it is. So your case-by-case examples will vary. And I just don't want anyone to walk away with the idea that we need to homogenize the LGBT community and integrate wordlessly into heteronormative communities. Kai, there are universalities, but there is a unique perspective which makes a story fresh. Very well said, Kai. Excellent. Now, we face a unique challenge being kids media creators in creating queer characters. And in my experience, which is limited, I have not worked with anybody who doesn't think that authentic queer representation is important. I would hazard that most of us haven't worked with someone who doesn't think that it's important. Yet I'd also bet most of the shows we worked on have had few queer characters, if any, depending on what part of the industry you work in. So to help wrap things up, I would like to talk about what barriers are there in the kids space. What are the barriers that we face, and how may we overcome these barriers? If everyone says that they care about queer representation, yet there's still problems when you try to do it, what are the problems? Funders, broadcasters, what is the, could you put more words to that? What is the problem that they pose? Determining what stories will look. Is that for funders and broadcasters?
I'm just gonna shout something out. They obviously, and this is something you've already talked about, is like they have to have queer writers. Like I think in my experience in the industry, it's still very buddy to buddy. It's like who you know is who you know. And until more people know more queer writers, and that also depends on lots of like socioeconomic reasons why there's queer writers in the first place. But yeah, they have to hire, has to come from within the organization, really.
Mhm. Pushback from parents, sensationalism, and controversy.
And I'd like to ask, is that really in Canada, is there real pushback from parents, or is there perhaps a broadcaster fear that there might be pushback from parents?
Perceived threat of pushback, controversy. Yes, I would like to highlight Leslie's comment. What might be done? Look at the numbers. Very good. Look.
But even with the Ontario curriculum, I mean, it was pockets of people who were very angry, but a lot of people were fine with it. So I think when you've got some people being very loud, that is what the broadcasters might be responding to.
Mhm.
Vocal minority.
How about this? I just want to add in the point of limited time in stories. When do we say this person is gay? So how do we combat these barriers? We can't control funders and broadcasters. We can't control parents. What can we control and what can we do? It's a tricky question, I know. Yes. Look at numbers, look at research, point out successful shows with queer characters. Open up avenues to get directly to families who want diverse content. Yes, go around large broadcasters, distributors, web content, freelance content, online, physical, targeted, community focused marketing. Make the identity of the characters the hook or selling point. Child and parents, child and parents. We're talking about child characters and parent characters. How about this one? Suggest workshops at your workplace. Promote LGBT talking points to your colleagues. Share research and statistics. Talk to children. Find visual ways to denote queerness. Or some visual ways we can denote queerness. Yeah, pairing popular queer positive games or books for TV. Pairing popular queer positive. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand your comment, Kai. I'm sorry. Oh, partnering, yes, perfect. Yes. Yes, contact LGBT resources and groups. Great. These are all great ideas. These are all great ideas. Thank you, everyone. Kelly Lynn, do we have time for questions?
Just a couple minutes, because we've hit 3 o'clock, and I do want to respect everybody's time. But if we've got a couple. Well, if we're done, can we go to the closing slide? Because I want to thank everybody. This has really been a terrific discussion. There's been a lot of engagement on this topic, and I think there's been a lot of learning shared. And so I want to thank all of you for participating in this. We have one last workshop tomorrow for the people with disabilities community. And thank you, of course, to Caitlin for leading this really great discussion. So we'll be now, were you thinking that we would send a link to your Google Doc to people, or?
Download it and send it to them along with the recording, or put it in the same spot as the recording.
Okay, we'll do that. So we'll send this out to everybody, and thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.